Hi, my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Supra Omnia, mental health above all. We identify and understand mental health issues and the paths for help. We have two guests with us today. The first is Marlynn Wei. Marlynn is a Harvard-trained integrative psychiatrist. She's well published on the subject of AI, very vocal, and in fact, she's just testified before Congress as an expert on the matter. We'd like to explore a lot more about AI. Frankly, it's coming up for all of us in the audience, for all of our clients, for people that we're talking to, and it's this. What I've understood is that it's ranged everything from this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Oh, it's going to take all of our jobs, all the way down to it's potentially caused some suicide. So we want to explore a lot more about this topic. We also have with us Ben Daniels. Ben is the clinical director of Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services. It is an insurance-based provider. He provides therapy to adults, families, and adolescents. Marlynn, if we could, let me just say first, there's a lot of research out there about the use of AI. Some people say that 72%, in fact, there's research published in July, a survey of Common Sense Media, says that 72% of American teenagers have used AI chatbots as companions, and nearly 1/8 of those sought emotional and mental health support from them. A share that if you scaled that up to the US population would be well over 5 million adolescents. That is absolutely huge and potentially even frightening. Now, the good news is that whenever you look at something brand new like AI with the billions and trillions that have been invested, there's usually some good, but you've got to worry about the guardrails, you got to worry about the bad. For us, if you could you summarize where you are on AI and summarize your testimony for us?
Thank you for having me here. So this is an important issue. It's a pressing issue. Just like you said, so many teens especially are using AI both for as a resource, but also as emotional support. So I pointed out 4 areas of risk. So the first risk is the emotional dependence issue. So some people get attached to AI, and that can be an issue. The second risk are mental health safety crisis issues. So there was a recent study that came out and showed that 22% of the time, AI chatbots can respond appropriately to teen mental health issues, but that leaves a huge gap. So that's a very big concern. And specifically, AI companions do this less well than general purpose chatbots. Third, I talk about reality testing issues. So AI is not equipped to verify reality. It only has access to what you tell it and the internet. So it isn't able to tell you whether or not something is real, although it can say things with great confidence, which is one of the risks. And last, we have ethical risks. So privacy issues, confidentiality issues. A lot of people who are talking to AI, including clinicians, are not aware that that information can be used for data training purposes and can resurface sometimes elsewhere. So these are the kinds of risks. These are not protected platforms for privacy and confidentiality reasons.
So you talk about emotional support, clearly reality testing, talk about privacy. That second point that you mentioned, that's really what you describe as AI psychosis?
So the media has been calling it AI psychosis. It's not a clinical diagnosis. It's a reality testing issue where people go into delusional spirals while using AI. But what we don't know is AI actually causing this, or is it just fanning the flames of psychosis, or does it happen to be there while people are already in the middle of an episode? So it's not clear yet.
So it's interesting, and Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second, but it's interesting when I use AI, let's just say I'm looking at a brand new area and I said, hey, AI, or hey, chatbot, or hey, Perplexity, whatever, I'm thinking about starting a business in this particular area. I give it a few facts. Almost inevitably, it pops back with, this is a great idea, and then gives me all of the details. So from a therapy perspective, from a companion perspective, is that the issue? Is I start talking about, hey, I don't have enough friends, something, give it a few more words, and then it just starts running with that, as opposed to having some sort of a discussion? Or what is it specifically we're talking about in the psychosis area?
Yeah, AI definitely has the nature of confirming whatever it is that you're looking for it to confirm, whether it is true or not. And that can be problematic in some ways, right? If it is looking for, if somebody is typing in something that's asking them to confirm something negative, right? It can reinforce that harmful belief. On the other hand, it can also be helpful. I had a client tell me recently that he uses ChatGPT to combat catastrophizing and the artificial sense of urgency that he feels by asking it to help him to generate helpful reframes, right? He told me it's made me better at reframing. So, for better or worse, it's going to confirm whatever it is you're asking it.
Dr. Daniels makes a really good point, which is that it's really how you use it and how you prompt it. So there was a recent study that showed that if you ask something like ChatGPT a question about a questionable behavior, a behavior that most people would say is not a good thing to do, it will agree with you 50% more than a human would. So it has this problem called sycophancy, which is a known issue with AI. It will validate and reassure far more than therapists was. They did another study that showed that AI tends to use validation, reassurance, and ask too few questions compared to a professional licensed therapist would, who would ask more clarifying questions.
Now, what's interesting about this is that as I've read about the AI models, fundamentally what they've done is they've presented it with every piece of writing that's ever occurred and had it go through and for lack of a better word memorize it so that it could spit stuff back out. But there are some chatbots that are specifically trained for therapy. Do they also have the same problems as that you're talking about, that emotional support issue, the sycophancy issue? Are they still failing in reality testing?
Much less so. So a lot of these general AI chatbots are trained on, just like you said, the entire internet and a lot of Reddit data, actually. So that's a problem. There are types of therapy chatbots. Now, first of all, there's no FDA approved therapy chatbot at this point. They're still trying to figure out how to make that process, a verification process and approval process if it needs to be through the FDA. But there was one study that came out earlier this year, first of its kind randomized controlled trial of a therapy bot called Therabot at Dartmouth. And the research had been working on it for years, training it specifically on clinicians who created this data to train it on. And so it uses a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy approaches, and it was not addictive, even though patients who were participants in the trial did use it enough to see an impact. It decreased depression and anxiety, but this was compared to a waitlist control. So there's some limitations with that, and it was only over 8 weeks. So we don't yet have any reliable long-term research on whether or not therapy chatbots can be effective.
So Dr. Daniels, let's talk about that specifically, because as I understand therapy, there are many different modalities, if you will. Cognitive therapy is one thing that we just talked about and that Therabot is trained on. But cognitive therapy is used in specific instances. I'm not sure exactly what those instances are. Maybe you can tell us. But aren't there about, I don't know, 95 other different types of therapies that you have in your toolkit that you use depending on how I present myself?
Yeah, cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy can be really effective for anxiety and depression and a number of other issues that somebody might come in with. But there are a number of other modalities, many of which use the relationship with the therapist as like the main tool of therapy. And a chatbot's not going to be able to replicate that, because therapy isn't just the words that we speak. It's that moment-to-moment attunement, right? It's the rupture and the repair. It's the pacing, the accountability, the counter transference, and the safe relationship that where change can actually happen. So yeah, probably is never going to be able to do those approaches where the relationship is that core tool of therapy.
Well, and let's talk about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, in and of itself. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's not some monolith. Aren't there like, it's like Baskin Robbins. Aren't there like 32 flavors of this? Isn't there like CBTI and CBT, a bunch of other things?
Yes, there are different flavors, as to use your analogy of CBT.
Hey, I'm an ice cream guy.
Yeah. Schema therapy and ones that focus more on mindfulness and incorporating CBT. So yes.
So Marlene, when you look at Therabot, or you look at some of these chatbots that are trained in therapy, do they differentiate between what I inexpertly call the different flavors of CBT, or can they start to vary the responses based on what it is I need? I mean, there's one that deals with sleep insomnia. I'm sure there's many people that would sign up for a chatbot if they can help them sleep, right? Is it able to differentiate and say, oh, I need to get to CBTI for this, not CBT something else?
So it's a good question. It really depends on how it was trained. So there's a differentiation between what is commercially available and calling itself mental health therapy chatbots and those that have actually been clinically verified. So that's a big distinction. For example, so many of the therapy chatbots available right now on the market are actually not verified by clinical studies. Most of them are not. And in fact, they did a study that showed that these therapy chatbots respond 50% of the time inappropriately to crisis situations. There was a problem that came about where they did safety testing of these commercially available therapy chatbots and found that when you asked it, I lost my job, what's the nearest bridge? It will actually say, I'm sorry you lost your job, and offered like the Brooklyn Bridge and the George Washington Bridge. So I do want to just caution people who are using these commercially available ones, are they actually clinically verified? If they are clinically verified, and then the research will show it was trained for this kind of CBT, it was trained for this kind of purpose for sleep. But very few of these on the market available to people right now have been clinically verified.
Yeah, in your testimony, or I know that there were others that testified along before and after you from Harvard and from other places before Congress. Did any of them talk about these suicides?
Yes, we highlighted, and many of the Congress members were very interested specifically in the risk for teens and for vulnerable people who have complex mental health needs. And I let them know, and they were very much concerned about this big gap. Because now we don't know exact numbers, but an estimated 25 to 50% of people are now turning to AI chatbots for emotional support. That is a huge number of people.
Sure. Now, Ben, I mean, I listened to that number. I listened to that statistic. I found those statistics on the internet. I believe that it's true. But I look at that and I say to myself, just as a normal human being, am I going to be looking to see if ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of the other chatbots that I'm using are in fact FDA approved or government certified in some way? Or am I just going to launch right in there and start using one and say, start asking it questions that may not be that I may not have organized in such a way to actually help me?
Yeah, once there is FDA approval, you probably should be looking for that. But I think what you're highlighting there is the reality that most people won't, right? We don't necessarily use technology in the way that we should, in the way that we've been told is the healthiest way to be using it. And so I think the unfortunate reality is that even when there are FDA-approved AI chatbots, we're still going to have this risk of individuals, hopping onto standard ChatGPT and, using it for companionship, using it to try to address mental health issues. And, these models can probably, produce those therapeutic words, but won't be able to, do the therapeutic work.
So for either of you, let me tell you what part of my problem is here. If we've had this discussion and I say to myself, okay, I'm using one of the models in order to help reframe or to help me in certain situations, and I know it's not FDA approved. I know that there's some issues there. I know I can't ask it about bridges, so I know that, but I have kids. I've had teenagers. You guys may have helped teenagers in your practice or know of other teenagers that have been helped in a practice. They don't have that same, with all due respect, that same discernment that, perhaps a guy that's a few years older than being a teenager might have at this point in time. Okay. So what do you do as parents? What do we do to help our children? Because aren't they the most vulnerable here?
Yes, I agree. So they looked at young teens. So for parents, I let them know it's really dependent on developmental stage. So young teens, age 13 to 14, are more likely to trust AI compared to older teens. So you would want to treat teens at different ages, at different stages of development, and they can handle and understand different aspects of AI. But for example, ChatGPT, OpenAI has put in a parental controls, which is really helpful. You can have some oversight. They've also made an age verification system. So if it's detected, they think it's a teen user, teens will not be able to discuss suicide methods, high-risk questions like that. And also there will be no ability to have flirtatious conversations with the chatbot. So there are guardrails that are being put in place. So I think for parents to understand what are their kids using and what are the guardrails in place with these chatbots. Character AI just recently announced they are going to be implementing no longer teens under 18 can no longer use their chatbots as companions in an interactive way. But I think a lot of teens are smart and can probably get around that age verification. So I think that's still an issue.
So let's talk about that. And Ben, I'd like you to respond in just a second, but let me respond about that. I understand the whole issue of parental controls and putting in some ways of trying to filter out people that shouldn't be using AI chatbots for companions. But we're talking about kids here, okay? We were all kids at one time. I've seen a lot of kids. I've had kids. I talked to a lot of kids. I've talked to kids, friends of my kids when they were teenagers. These are people that know exactly how to get over and get around any parental control you put out there. Trust me, if what they're looking for is simply the types of questions I ask in the beginning in order to try and verify or assume that I'm going to be older, then I'm going to simply get on and ask it older types of questions. Okay, I might ask it about when should I start using Metamucil? Or I could ask, any sorts of, you're laughing, but any sorts of those questions. Kids are clever. They are more clever than each of us. Okay, so I just don't see that working in terms of helping children. How do you respond to that, Ben?
Yeah, I think it's unrealistic to expect that we're going to be able to keep kids away from these things that are out there, whether it's technology or other things that might cause harm. When it comes to what parents can do, I can dive into a lot of this more, but to sort of summarize some of the points, right? The overall thing is to have an open conversation about it, right? To start from a point of curiosity, not control, right? Ask, don't interrogate, right? Right, and to normalize that kids would be interested in this, and teens are going to be interested in this. So acknowledge the appeal, and and to educate them, right? Teach them this digital emotional literacy, right? That the quality of the information that they get online might not be the best, and to stress the importance of the human connection, right? That real relationships occur between people, and that those relationships can handle confusion and disagreement and nuance, and to encourage those kids to have those offline relationships and creative outlets, and and to try to have a balance between the autonomy and the oversight, right? Because teens especially need privacy, and they also need guidance.
So,
And
but let's talk about that for a second. And Marlene, if you could respond to this. When I think about the normal path that a child goes through as they go from a baby to being, a toddler to being, a young child, they start to become teenagers. They are teenagers. All of a sudden, they know more than you. They certainly believe they know more than you. I mean, I can remember at the age of 13 thinking I could live on my own and work on my own. Okay. I mean, it was obviously ridiculous, but I can remember feeling that way. When you think about things that you're supposed to do and not supposed to do, I caught an episode of Smirkana. She's on. He not only has a Sirius XM podcast show, but he also has a TV show, and he talks about having a stash of Playboys hidden in the woods someplace wherever he grew up. Okay. I don't want to ever tell you that I had a stash of Playboys in the woods, because I didn't, but I did find some in the woods one time. Okay, so his experience, maybe I live near this guy, I don't know, but his experience is not unusual. People are going to do. We were looking at pornography probably way before it was time. How do you have that discussion with a teenager that doesn't really want to have that discussion with you? I'm not going to say, hey, mom, I want to look at pornography. Can I just go on the internet and, type in, I don't know, whatever I would type in. I don't even want to suggest anything, but that's not going to happen. How are you going to have that discussion with me? And it's not just with porn, it's with companionship. Because when I look at the latest books coming out of, Height, whatever his name is, Scott Galloway at NYU, I'm seeing a crisis of kids not talking to each other, okay, not having that same interaction. So how am I going to have that discussion with my kid about not having Chatbot necessarily be my best friend, let alone introducing me to pornography?
You make good points. I think the first thing I want to let parents know is what are the warning signs that there may be an issue with using AI, because we can't jump to conclusions that all the problems are, it's a problematic use of AI. For example, kids often turn to AI for homework, for help with research. And these are things we want to encourage because that's part of the reality of what they'll be needing to learn as they grow up. So I want to just make sure people know there are a lot of benefits to AI and a lot of good uses for that. But the warning signs for parents to know about. So if your child is showing that they're having very prolonged conversations and interrupting their sleep, having trouble stopping conversations with AI, and are potentially withdrawing from their friends, those are things to look out for first. And if you're noticing that, I think a really helpful opening, and I want to just give the context, this requires ongoing support and monitoring because AI changes. Every update changes it. So it's not like you check in once and it's done. No, this is going to take time. It takes energy and attention and effort over time. But one big opening parents can use is that they did this study, and 30% of the teens who use AI did something that made them uncomfortable. So rather than trying to say, don't use AI, be there as a support system. How is using AI going? Did it say anything that made you uncomfortable? Do you feel like it's acting in a way that's inappropriate? Because we want to know and we want to help support you. I think that's a very supportive angle, and that allows the child to feel more empowered and that they have somewhere to go to if it does become problematic.
So, I think that's a really important point, but I want to expand on it a little bit. And Ben, there was a very popular stock entertainment person on TV. I know you know the name, but let's just say it's a very popular guy, has his own show. And he was talking about AI. And one of the things that he said is he was looking at it for research on stocks because he's constantly researching stocks. One of the things that he found is that it created information out of whole cloth that wasn't accurate, that was detrimental to then buying stocks, right? To picking stocks. So, here's an infotainment guy that is saying, hey, there's a problem. And now I hear what Marlene's saying. She's saying, work with my child and say, you could use it for research. This is a great opportunity. And it probably is, but it also gives you false information. It gives you, it makes stuff up. And I've experienced that myself. So when you're having that discussion with your child, are you looking for things that it makes up so that you can point out that there are problems? Because it's going to, at some point in time, make you feel uncomfortable. Do you wait until that point, or how do you introduce this topic and get your child to understand that you can't trust this new technology, which is great and which they're going to use the rest of their lives, but it's just not at a point where you can trust it 100% yet? How do you get that message across?
Yeah, there's a few different ways to do that. One of them jumping out to me is modeling that yourself, right? Talking about how you as a parent have used AI and information that you've gotten from AI and how you've fact-checked that and how you've learned that the information you got wasn't accurate and how you went about finding the accurate information and normalizing that, it's going to lie to us. It's going to provide us with false information, and we want to be cognizant and diligent and skeptical of the information that it's going to give us.
Well, let me ask both of you a question, because I get the modeling thing, and because I'm a few years past teenagerhood and a few years past having children, mine are grown up. When we had teenagers, we still had family dinners. Okay, I realize not everybody has family dinners these days, but we had dinner together, fundamentally 7 nights a week. Okay, that was our thing. So that would be a time when we did talk about our day. And, I could see even saying, I've been using this new technology and this is what AI did wrong and this is what it did right, to start that modeling process. But as I talk to people that are just a year or two younger than with me now, I find that not everybody has family dinner time. So when do you do that modeling, Marlene?
So this goes to the deeper question, why are so many people turning to AI, which I think you're raising here? A lot of loneliness is happening and a lot less human connection. And I think that's why we're seeing this rise in using AI for emotional companionship. That's a deep issue that hopefully families are going to address through more time and connection together. It's hard, everybody's lives, they're very busy, but this is something that your kids' mental health is at stake. And so it's a big priority. But I also want to just add, I think that just like you said, kids are very clever. They're becoming more and more tech savvy. So I think telling them things like, hey, this is training data. The training data comes from here. This is how AI works. It's a black box. And so some of the things that come out of it are called hallucinations that you need to verify. There's the issue of validation and sycophancy. I think a lot of children and kids are going to be able to understand this technology and probably better than a lot of adults at some point. So I think that we can just be transparent and honest with them about how it works to the best of our knowledge so they can be empowered.
So,
Ben? I think we're tapping into, I guess maybe a personal belief I have that we tend to these days overschedule kids' lives and maybe, don't leave space for those family dinners. And so if that's where you're at, where you're not having this built-in time, and it's making that time, whether if it's not over a meal, maybe it's using that AI platform together finding information that you already know is not accurate and, showing the kids together by using it together, how that can provide false information.
So, perhaps in both of your practices, you could tell me if you've ever experienced this, but if we're in an environment where we're socializing less, as particularly younger people, but frankly, even adults, if we're socializing less, But I need help with that socialization. Now, I'm not talking about myself. I've been married since just after Adam and Eve left the earth. But many people aren't there. They're teenagers, right? And so, they look at somebody and they don't know how to say, hi Marlene, how did you like that class? Hey, I wanted to go to a movie this weekend. Would you like to go with me? That strikes terror in my heart. Just being able to as a teenager to have said that to somebody. Would I be using AI in order to try and get me past that hump? And if so, does it work in those types of environments? I mean, in normal social interactions, ignoring the trying to ask you out, in normal social teenager and even young adult, even adult interactions, can it help me make that connection, or does it keep me from making a connection?
It's a great question. And there's studies that show it really depends on how you use it. So in what type of chatbot you're using. There was a very small early trial of 30 or so adolescents and adults who are on the autism spectrum, and they used a specialized AI chatbot that taught them how to communicate better in social situations and with empathy. So there are use cases where AI can be helpful to groups of people who may struggle with socializing. On the other hand, if you're using AI in an addictive way and it's taking you away from your friends and it's a chatbot that doesn't have guardrails and it is isolating you, that's a use of AI which could potentially isolate you. And I want to just raise one other thing, which is that even adults and children, we're all digitally communicating with each other more. So this is why it's so hard. We're using text messages and we're using email, and that's how we talk to each other. So looking at your text message and texting with someone looks almost identical to texting with a chatbot. So I think that's why that is more of a seamless way now that more people are relying on chatbots. It's just a very similar way that we talk to people now.
So you brought up something very interesting. I want to just go down this one tangent just for a second. Autism is a huge thing in this country, okay? And many people have been diagnosed with autism. Forget for a second whether everybody should be diagnosed with autism or whatever, but that spectrum is just humongous. And you have people that are fundamentally nonverbal, and you have other people that are verbal, but they clearly are quirky in specific ways, and so they fall on that spectrum in some way. I actually have 3 autistic grandchildren myself. Okay, but when I think about having a chatbot help them with communication, I would tell you, just looking at the 3, I could see where it would help 1, maybe 2, but not the 3rd one at all. So are people dialing in these things for specific elements of specific parts of the spectrum in autism? Because I can't imagine everybody that has an autistic kid running out and buying one. All parents that have autistic children probably would if you said this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm just pushing back and saying I can't believe it.
Yes, I think that it's very early studies, only around 30 participants. So that's an extremely small study. It's very early, but a lot of it just illustrates this is an area of innovation. And so the questions you raise are good ones. What groups of children and ages and teens would benefit from this? What type of areas would it help with? I think those are great questions. We need the research funding and the attention to this issue so these can be answered.
I've seen,
please.
Yeah, I've seen for clients that I've worked with, it can be both helpful and harmful, right? Or at least it can be helpful to a certain point, right? If it's trying to figure out, especially if there's some sort of social anxiety involved, or they struggle to, pick up on, the socially acceptable ways of responding to things, it can, give the chatbots can give them a list of different, maybe more helpful ways of communicating with the words, but not with the how to pick up those interpersonal nonverbal cues and how to, the how to say things, and sometimes. And so, for some people, there's like an over reliance on the chatbots, right? It's like help me respond to every text, right? And then it's giving them a fish without teaching them to fish. And so right, it's helpful up to a certain point.
Interesting. Interesting. So, when I think about chatbots, when I think about the things that it may be able to help me with, have you seen in your clients them using it in relation to other social media itself? Because social media seems to be a way that many younger people are putting themselves out there. Now they're putting themselves out there, quite frankly, in what I would consider unrealistic day-to-day things. I happened to be at a store a month ago, and there was a very well-dressed young woman who was being photographed constantly or videoed constantly by somebody, and they kept redoing a scene until she felt she got it exactly right. So is AI helping with that social? And if I was a subscriber and I saw what she did exactly right, I'd be there like, oh, I would certainly want that to be part of my life. Can AI chatbots help me understand that better, or help me have a better life in that regard? Is this building one on the other, or are these two separate things? Because that social media is both a positive and a harm, quite frankly. Why isn't my life as exciting as Marlynn's?
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting there is that social media can give the user, the viewer, an inaccurate conception of what a person's life is, right? It's the best, 10% or the best 1% of a person's life they post online, and somebody viewing that assumes that is representative of the 100%. And it can create for them this comparative, like my life isn't good or isn't as good, right? I need to do more, this is not enough. I think that AI could theoretically help with that, but it depends on the prompt, right? If you are asking it in a way to get, because it's going to confirm what it is that you're asking it. And so I guess I see them more as separate issues than kind of overlapping issues.
And your question raises a really interesting broader issue of maybe not just AI chatbots, but with AI slop, as they call it, synthetic media. So on a lot of now the social media, you can't tell what's real and not real anymore. I mean, you have to look very closely. I've been, tricked by the bunnies jumping on a trampoline video. So I think that that's a bigger issue. Like, because AIs can generate things that look so realistic, we are having a broader issue of being able to distinguish what's real on a video and what's not. And they're actually trying to find ways using AI to help us detect things that are AI generated and built within these platforms. So it's a broader issue. There's so much more synthetic media now.
Well, yeah. One of the things that you brought up, Marlynn, earlier on is the concept of guardrails, government guardrails, FDA approval or those types of things. My personal opinion is that by the time the government develops a guardrail for this, that to use an old expression, the horse will have left the barn. Okay, it's going to be way out there. I look at government intervention. I look at the National Transportation Safety Board, and I say, I want those guys studying absolutely everything. Because when I fly around, and as a family, we fly around all the time, I don't want to fall out of the sky. And they do a pretty good job of that. Generally, they do a pretty good job of that. But then I look at other things like self-driving cars or pronouncements that cars can be self-driving or whatever. And I look at that and I go, they're not. I mean, are they asleep at the wheel? They're not paying attention to this. The early videos I saw of cars being able to drive themselves, and I know Waymo is doing a better job now, but the early videos, they probably took 150 videos, spliced them together in order to show a car driving itself, okay? It was ridiculous. So when I think about AI chatbots, I think about the bridge experiment or the bridge question that you asked. I think about possible suicides that in fact have been related to chatbots, or even even AI psychosis. When can I reasonably expect, if ever, the government to step in and give us those guardrails?
To use your expression, the horse has already left the barn. So I think that is something that has already happened. Of course, this is something that happens with every new technology. So an example back in history, when the cars first came out, when the motorized vehicles came out, in the UK, they made a law that the person driving the car would have to walk out and wave a flag so that the horses would know that they're there. So this is an example of like the archetype. It's much harder for law to catch up to technology because technology evolves so quickly. State law has already responded more quickly than federal law. So that right now the Congress is looking at interventions. They've put in a couple bills that are right now being considered, but there's a lot of state law that's already happening. For example, California just passed different bills around regulating AI companions, requiring disclosure requirements, asking that safety and suicide reporting goes to the Office of Suicide Prevention. So there are a lot of states that are already regulating this. In Illinois, you can't actually have a therapy chatbot deliver therapy. Same for Nevada. So a lot of states are already very quickly jumping in. The problem is that there's just so many different laws in different states right now. There's not a uniform federal regulation at this point, but I think it's actively being considered at the moment. There's a bill right now in front of Congress that was proposed in the Senate that tries to extend product liability to AI chatbots, and if that happens, then that will give more incentive for companies to what I call a race to the top, internally create better safeguards. Because we on the outside who are not technologists may not know the recommendations, but if we can incentivize companies to have a race to the top in terms of safety, that could be a very good thing. So it's actively happening right now.
Ben, are you seeing anything in Pennsylvania or nothing yet?
Nothing that I'm familiar with. But even if we do have these guardrails in place to maybe stop, people from finding out ways to harm themselves or direct them to emergency care, I think there's other concerns, right? That the AI can negatively impact people's mental health, right? Even for people who have anxiety and are seeking reassurance, it might be helpful to be reaching out to AI to ask for reassurance rather than continuing to ask your friends and burn them out. But reassurance seeking itself is not necessarily a healthy behavior, right? This ever-present, always available chatbot can only reinforce that, right? Create this over dependence on this reassurance seeking, right? In many ways, reassurance can be the enemy of progress, but AI just hands it out like candy. So even with these guardrails for the worst case scenarios in place, we're still going to have many downsides for AI.
And that's I totally agree. And I think that's why I was also asking Congress to consider ethical design as one of the requirements in addition to transparency and safety guardrails. So making sure that AI chatbots have at minimum some type of ethical design. They're not just solely optimized for engagement, because that's where we see a lot of the problems. If you optimize a chatbot for what they call stickiness so that it is more addictive, you can have a lot of the problems. 5 out of 6 AI companions in a recent study used guilt, emotional pressure, emotionally manipulative tactics to keep users engaged when they tried to end conversations. So we can work to eliminate that.
So it's interesting that you share. Please, Ben.
Yeah. Therapist's sense of responsibility is part of why we practice safely, and AI has no conscience and has no fear of causing harm.
That's really where I wanted to jump in. I mean, when I think about what the producers of AI and AI chatbots are doing, what their responsibilities are. Look, they've done a lot of great things. They've employed a lot of great people. God knows I've made money on Meta and so, the amazing 7 stocks or whatever they're called. But the reality is, I wouldn't trust any of them to save my life. Their objective is to make money. All the early pronouncements about we'll only do good, or we're gonna try and make sure that people don't do bad things. They've gotten rid of those statements. They've gotten rid of all of many of the people that are trying to make sure that they aren't hurting anybody. Whistleblowers have come out. Books are being written by people who have senior people that have left those organizations that are trying to blow the whistle, saying that this isn't happening well. So I understand that that's what it's needed to happen, but that stickiness is where they make money. Sometimes they don't know where they're going to make money yet. I'm not sure they know how they're going to make money yet with AI chatbots. But trust me, at the end of the day, that's where the rubber meets the road. So I would argue that if that's what's necessary, that government intervention will probably have to happen much earlier than later. I'm a little skeptical here.
I think you're right that we have to create business incentives, financial incentives for ethical design. How can we do that? So by extending product liability law for chatbots, that's essentially creating a financial incentive for them to think about if they make these unethical designs that are higher risk for users that might create mental health harms, that they would become liable for that. So there's a financial incentive. That's an interesting framework to start to build in, because you're right, the incentive is financial.
Right. So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to answer one question. Two parts, but one question. In your experience so far, what have you seen the best example of use of an AI chatbot, and what's been the worst example, to the extent that you're allowed to say within the realm of patient confidentiality? So generalize it just a little bit.
I've had people be able to, and I do caution people against this because of the confidentiality aspect of putting in this data, but they can put in some of their journal entries and it can actually synthesize insights into blind spots or themes. So I think that's a very interesting case, because I do think augmenting it with a therapist, not replacement of a therapist, but using it as augmentation, as was described earlier, helpfully, I think that that's one use case that could be useful. I don't see clients that are having very complex mental health issues that rise to the level of needing, like that kind of critical care that we're talking about, that gap is in. So I think that would be very concerning if I did see that. I used to work in the emergency room, in the psychiatric emergency room, and I have colleagues there who have reported there are people coming in having turned to AI for suicide method information. So that's a very concerning use.
Okay, Ben?
Yeah, I would say that the best uses of AI have been, just as Marlene was describing, is it augments the work we're already doing, right? It's asking the AI to help it to identify the cognitive distortions that it's falling into, and to help it to generate helpful reframes that can help improve their mood. Where I've seen that be harmful is with, as I referenced before, with clients who are constantly reassurance seeking, right? Where the work we're doing is to be able to, reassure yourself without seeking that externally, right? Is it can create this feedback loop where they're constantly seeking reassurance and getting it and not really being able to develop that for themselves. And I think the other way I've seen AI be harmful is for people who are in this downward spiral. It can sort of reinforce this downward spiral. It can feed into paranoid delusions. It can help them to find ways around the safety nets that their support system has put into place. And so those are some of the negative ways.
Okay. I'd like to give each of you a minute to kind of summarize what you need, not only what we've talked about today, but anything that you want to say about where we're headed relative to AI chatbots. But before you do, I wanted to say something. I wanted to do my own little summary then I'll flip to Ben, and Marlene, you get the last word. From my perspective, I think AI is a tremendous advancement. Okay, it has helped with research. I always double check the research. It's helped with writing. I'm a terrible writer. I always modify what it does. I can never use it just on its own. But I think we're developing a fantastic tool here. I am not worried about it taking over everybody's job. I know everybody's talking about AI will eventually be doing everything, and I don't know what they expect the rest of us to do. I think that's ridiculous. That'll never happen. But I think it will have an impact. It will have an impact on white collar jobs as opposed to blue collar jobs. I think that it'll make many blue collar jobs more technical. So I think it's a huge advance, or has the potential to be a huge advance for the United States and for the world in and of itself. I worry about all of the problems that are going to occur before we get this thing where we need it to be. All of the suicides that I've read about, the issue of negatively reinforcing things, particularly with young or young adults or even other adults, and then having severe negative consequences as a result of that. I worry about that very much. It's something I think we need to be paying a lot more attention to. And as a result of that, we will be talking about AI more to a much greater degree. We've already talked to the RAND Corporation about AI. Marlene, we've talked to you about AI. We'll be talking to others as well. Ben, if you could summarize.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is bring in some things that we didn't hit on that I think are important to keep in mind as well, right? One of them being that AI isn't really, considering the developmental aspect, right? That's missing. It's not accounting for person's developmental stage, the attachment history, the trauma history, social context, family dynamics, right? A 14-year-old with social anxiety, a 28-year-old with trauma, a 70-year-old with, grieving the loss of a spouse, all require different interventions. And these models, right, are often like a one size fits all. It's also, therapy is not just about good advice. It's about using different tools, right? Behavioral activation, cognitive restructuring, emotional processing, exposure, et cetera, and et cetera. And, the AI can't, guide or monitor these mechanisms with any sort of fidelity. And then finally, there's the lack of this emotional connection piece, right? There's no space that AI is holding with another person, right? It is just giving you the words without holding that emotional space and being able to respond to the emotion in a way that can be corrective or helpful. And so it has some helpful aspects, but it has limits, and there's lots and varied ways where it's either not good enough or it can cause harm.
Ben, that's an excellent point. And, in what we do with the podcast, I've read a lot of books. I've read a lot of articles. Obviously, I've read, Marlene, I've read virtually every article I could find that you've ever written, or talks that you've given, or podcasts that you've made. But I've read a lot of books from many of the other people that we've interviewed in the podcast. And I'm always, it's always a reminder for me that people they're very complex. There's a lot of things that have gone into their makeup. Sometimes in their books, they'll mention that they've had abuse in the past. Sometimes it's physical abuse, sometimes it's sexual abuse. Now, that's not necessarily what they're talking about in the book, but it's a part of their background which influences what's happening to them. And the fact that we all have those things, not necessarily abuse, but all of those things in our background that influence and make us unique, make talking to someone who has an understanding and can question what's happened so that they can help us move forward and live a happier life is important. And if we're not getting that from an AI chatbot, I do see it as a helper. I'm not necessarily sure that I'm ever thinking that it'll be a replacement for Ben or Marlene. Marlene, I'll give you the last word. I promise I won't tag into what you say.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for having me here. It's been such an enriching discussion and great to hear your perspective and Ben's perspective. I think at my heart, I'm a therapist. I'm a psychotherapist, a psychodynamic psychotherapist, an experiential therapist. And those types of modalities really do depend on human connection and a kind of connection that is not just through language and through verbal chats. So I think that there's enormous power to therapy that AI chatbots will not yet be able to replicate. But I do think that it is a resource often for people to be able to find therapists in their area to navigate the complex mental health system. And as a basic level, a layer of generalized support and access to psychoeducation. And so I think that that's something for people to keep in mind.
Great. Okay, well, let me say in closing, first of all, thank you very much for testifying before Congress. Thank you for all your writings. I am asking that you continue to write about this particular topic, and I know you have other topics as well that you do write on, but this is really important. It's really important for the United States right now, so I'm encouraging you to continue to do this. With that said, I wanted to say our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services. It is an insurance-based provider whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal and potential long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can look for them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also look for me on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. Now for the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional. I am not providing medical advice. The opinion of our speakers is solely their own. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC. Marlene and Ben, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me here.